So the real question that you want to ask is, of your current IT asset management provider, what does their program look like? What kind of, for the analogy, what kind of car do they drive? Because a car may be a car, but as we all know, there's a vast difference between a Corvette and a Yugo. And maybe 2 years ago or 18 months ago, in the professional liability arena, where, again, is where we find coverage for data breach, you would say that almost all of the policies that existed were Yugos. The craftsmanship of the policy, the way the policy form was written, the way the policy would perform in a loss, how claims were handled, and just overall breadth of coverage were very basic and may or may not, and in most cases, I would say 99% of the time, never addressed the issue of privacy or data breach. Now, that's a very big problem, because if in a professional liability policy a specific item like that isn't mentioned, it's assumed there is no coverage. So if anyone out there from an IT asset management provider standpoint is going along with a policy that's a couple years old that the carrier they're working with hasn't updated any coverage or enhanced it, they are driving the proverbial Yugo. And the nice part about it is there is a way to get into the new Corvette, and even better news, more so from their standpoint than yours, is that the Corvette doesn't cost any more than the Yugo. The providers have all taken a look at, the insurance carriers, I should say, have all taken a look at the risk. They understand it now. There's a few that do it very, very well and handle it across the board. From a IT asset management provider program to a Fortune 100 company, they'll write it across the board for different industries. So they're not, they understand how this all plays together and consequently know what the cost structure needs to be. So how do you ask, your provider, well, is it a Corvette or is it a Yugo? And further, how are they going to be able to articulate to you, well, it's a Corvette, outside of them just saying, no, everything's good, we have a good policy? Because I can tell you that there's a lot of people out there that really truly believe they have a good policy and the coverage is there. But it's one of those deals where the devil is definitely in the details. And if their insurance broker and they do not understand those details, then that Corvette most definitely is not a Corvette. So I really want to do what we'd say is check under the hood. There's these on this slide are the critical components of a well-written professional liability policy, which will include data breach as part of the coverage. Specifically, what you look at in professional liability policies is everything hinges on what the professional services definition is. And what we look for in the insurance world is a very broad definition of coverage provided, limited, but not including, I should say, but not limited to, wording that includes consulting, destruction services, recycling services, any number of things. So it's really all-encompassing to what your provider provides to you. On top of that, there will be a list of wrongful acts that are covered. And what you want to see is that privacy breach or data breach is a wrongful act that will be taken care of underneath the policy. Part and parcel to that, when we look back at that first slide and there was a third-party damages bullet point, third-party damages, when there's a privacy breach or a data breach, fall under pretty specific lawsuits and suits that come from clients of yours. And those will all be more so, not so much that they're going to have financial implications because their data was breached, although that's certainly a possibility. But more times than not, you'll have people that will bring suit against you for certain issues of mental anguish, emotional distress, and name the lawsuits that way. There's a couple reasons they do it. One, it's a pretty ambiguous lawsuit, and it's hard to attach a dollar sign to that. And so what plaintiffs' attorneys are really good at is wording it as such so that they end up with a settlement. And jury will look at that and be very sympathetic to say, well, boy, Joe Smith here lost, his data was breached. He had no idea who had his Social Security number, and he was just worried sick for, 2 months about it. What's the dollar sign to put on that? Usually it's pretty hefty. So that's a critical component, and a lot of professional liability policies don't necessarily automatically give you the bodily injury coverage. So I will tell you, I think that is a critical component. Past that, once you have the data breach included, you'd like to see some sort of specifically named coverage in the policy for notification and monitoring expense. Again, based on all the rules and legislation and regulations, there needs to be an effort to notify all the affected or potentially affected individuals and to offer them credit monitoring services for a year. Now, depending on who you talk to and what reports you read and what services are being offered, notification monitoring expense can run anywhere from I'd say $75 an individual up to $200 to $250 depending on who's doing it. I'll tell you, one of the greatest strengths of the insurance world and the insurance carriers that provide coverage and do it the right way here is that they really know how to do notification monitoring and to do it effectively and cheaply. So their management of that at the end of the day will allow for far less dollars to be paid out on a claim, and ultimately benefits everyone involved because they can, again, do it very quickly and easily. A big piece of coverage nowadays that you will see very few policies include, but I'm proud to say we've got it covered in ours, is a civil fines and penalties clause. Again, based on regulation and legislation, there are civil fines and penalties that will be doled out by both the federal level and at the state level if a breach occurs. Unfortunately, as well as they try to lay out what the guidelines are for the different penalty levels, there's a lot of ambiguity in those. And unfortunately, you're not going to know what you're going to get hit with until the time when the breach occurs and all of this works through. And somebody at the state level more than likely looks at their budget and says, boy, this is not balanced this year. Wait a minute, we can have a quick fundraiser here. There was just this breach. Let's max out what the fine is. And we've seen that happen. So I caution everybody on that one. It's important from two levels here. One is you want to know that within your provider's insurance policy, civil fines and penalties is covered. And you want that covered because, one, your provider could get hit with the fine. And two, quite frankly, you could get hit with the fine. And the way that we structure the policy is in a two-part system so that your provider, and I'm going to use Lifespan here, let's say Lifespan is your provider, under their policy, they're going to pay out, the insurance carrier will pay for their fine under one part of the policy. And if you are hit with a fine because of a breach, you can seek recovery for those damages from Lifespan and their insurance policy under a separate part. Basically making sure we take care of everybody here.